Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. So today we will take up the daily edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 23rd November 2019. So the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on the screen. And in this we will take up two articles from our preliminary examination perspective, and the first in this line is the location known as Ghoramara and the Sundarbans Delta. And second is the GST Council, and both these are present on page number 11 and page number 15. However, regarding other topics that are in news today are basically those topics which have also been covered previously in the DNS videos. So for example, this topic on page number 1 reads that GDP slump will hit $5 trillion target, and this has been said by the CEO of Niti Aayog. Now in the previous DNS videos, we have already covered the slowdown in consumption expenditure and the challenges in achieving the $5 trillion economy target. And that is why what we will do is that we will revise from both the DNS videos in the present video only. So we have embedded the previous DNS videos in this video itself for your revision. Secondly, the articles on page number 13 and 15 are related to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And again, we have discussed about the RCEP in detail in one of the previous DNS videos. So that part has also been added to this video for your revision. And finally, two other issues on page number 10 are the electoral bonds and Brexit, and which have also been covered previously. So for these videos, we will provide you a reference as to from which DNS video you should revise both these topics. So the purpose of today's DNS should be your revision of important topics that were in news in the past 1.5 months. And that is mainly because these issues have already been discussed in detail in the previous DNS videos. However, today we have discussed these two articles from a fresher perspective. So let us start our discussion now. Now this article on page number 11 is related to the Sundarban Delta. And it talks about an island of the Sundarbans Delta, that is the Ghoramara. And this island is facing issues because of rising sea level, because of the silt which is being brought by the river, that is the river Ganga and Brahmaputra in this delta, and also it faces flooding due to the tides in the region. And that is why many people who are residing on this island are now fleeing to different other islands. And they have started migrating to islands like Ganga, Sagar, etc. So in this background, let us look at the location of this Ghoramara island. And these aspects can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view under the topic General Issues on Environment and Ecology. So this Ghoramara island is located near the Sagar island, and this lies in the Sundarban Delta in the state of West Bengal. Now we note that the Sundarban Delta is shared by India and Bangladesh. And this Ghoramara island has been in news and becomes extremely important for us from the preliminary examination because it is facing issues because of climate change. The first reason is that it is facing siltation due to the silt which is brought by the river Ganga. Secondly, this delta of Sundarbans is facing subsidence. And due to this island of Ghoramara is getting submerged over a period of time. And thirdly, it is also facing issues because of the rising sea level. So that is why this can be an important location for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And regarding Sagar Island, you should also note that it is an island in the Ganges Delta, and you can see the location of Sagar Island here. So this Ghoramara Island is located very close to the Sagar Island, as you can see in this map. So from preliminary examination point of view, what is important for us is the location of Ghoramara, which is facing subsidence and submergence due to the rising sea level, which is a consequence of the climate change and global warming. Now in the prelims compass of environment and ecology, we have provided the details of Ramsar wetland sites in India. And accordingly, we have provided the details of Sundarban wetland, which falls under the Ramsar wetland site in India. So regarding Sundarbans, you should note that it is located in the state of West Bengal. And as you can see in this map, this Sundarbans Delta is shared by India as well as Bangladesh. Further, this is located within the largest mangrove forest in the world. So this becomes an extremely important fact for us. Further, the Sundarban Tiger Reserve is also located within this Sundarbans Delta. And this has also been declared as the critical tiger habitat under India's Wildlife Protection Act. And one unique fact regarding the Sundarbans is that these are the only mangrove habitat which supports a significant population of tigers across the world. So here it should be noted that in no other location in the world, tigers are found in the mangrove habitats. And that is why it is one of the unique locations for us and can be important for exam. Further, these Sundarbans Delta are home to a large number of rare and globally threatened species, and some of the important ones include the critically endangered or the northern river terrapin, which has been listed as critically endangered under the IUCN's red list. Further, it is also home to Irrawaddy dolphin, which has been listed as endangered under the IUCN's red list. And it is known for the fishing cat, which has been listed as vulnerable under the IUCN's red list. Further, you should note that it is listed as World Heritage Site and is also included under the UNESCO's World Network of Biosphere Reserves, or in the Man and Biosphere Program of the UNESCO. So all these aspects and facts related to the Sundarbans can be extremely important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Now in this article on page number 15, the present chairman of the Finance Commission, N.K. Singh, has said that there is a need for more coordination and better coordination mechanism between the GST Council and the Finance Commission. And in this line, he has said that there should be clear terms on how the GST Council and the Finance Commission will work together. Now, he has raised this issue of coordination between the GST Council and the Finance Commission because the Finance Commission recommends the devolution of revenues to the state governments. However, in this line, he has said that the GST tax rates, exemptions and changes and the implementation of these GST tax rates are entirely within the domain of GST Council. And that is why such kind of division of powers may lead to the questions about who has the authority to monitor, scrutinize and evaluate the best outcomes, etc. And that is why he has said that there is a need for developing a coordination mechanism between the two constitutional bodies. Now, when the goods and services tax was introduced, a guaranteed 14% compensation was provided to the states to compensate for the revenue loss that occurs due to the implementation of GST to these states. However, this guaranteed compensation would end by the year 2022. Further, you should note that the Finance Commission provides for various grants to the state under the statutory grants under the Article 275 of the Indian Constitution. And that is why, as and when this GST compensation is withdrawn after the year 2022, it will have impact on the recommendations which are provided by the Finance Commission regarding the grants that are to be provided under the Article 275. And that is why there is lack of clarity about what is going to happen after 2022. And that is because many states are demanding that this compensation which has been granted by the GST for first 5 years should be extended further. And that is because most of the states are facing revenue loss because of the new GST system which has been implemented. Now this is a developing story and further clarity will be available in the coming days. So in this regard, let us only look at GST Council from our preliminary examination perspective. And this will fall under the preliminary examination syllabus under the topic Economic Development. Now the GST Council has been formed by the 101st Constitutional Amendment Act, and as such it is a constitutional body. Further, the Union Finance Minister is the chairman of GST Council, and it also includes other ministers like the Union Minister of State in charge of Revenue and Finance, and also Minister in charge of Finance and Taxation of State as members. Thirdly, the members of the GST Council choose amongst themselves a vice chairman of the council. Now, for any meeting to take place of the GST Council, at least half of the total number of members of the GST Council should be present in such meeting. And that is what is called as the quorum of the meetings. That is, one half of the total members of the GST Council shall constitute the quorum at its meeting. Now, how are the decisions taken at this GST Council? And what are the voting weightage of the center and the state governments? So every decision of the GST Council shall be taken at a meeting by a majority of not less than 3/4 of the weighted votes of the members present and voting. And in this case, the central government has a weightage of 1/3 votes, while all the state governments have the weightage of 2/3 votes. So this means that without the concurrence of the central government, no decision can be taken. And this also reflects that the central government has an effective veto on all the decisions of GST councils. So this means that neither the central government nor the state governments collectively can take any decision. And that is why so far all the decisions in the GST Council have been taken by consensus. Further, regarding the functions of the GST Council, you should note that it recommends to the Union and the states on various matters. And some of these matters include the taxes, cess and surcharges which are to be levied by the Union, states and the local bodies, and which all taxes etc. can be subsumed in the garb of GST. Further, this council can take decisions on various goods and services that may be subjected to or exempted from the GST. So any exemption of goods from the GST tax regime will also be recommended by the GST Council, and hence the decision will be collective of the central and the state government. Further, it decides the various rates of the GST and also any special rate or rates for a specified period to raise additional resources during any disaster. Further, it has been provided in the Constitutional Amendment Act itself that the GST Council shall recommend the date on which the GST will be levied on petroleum crude, high-speed diesel, motor spirit, natural gas, aviation, turbine fuel, etc. So all these are presently not included in the GST regime. However, the GST Council has the power of recommending the date from which the taxes on these products can be imposed. So these are few aspects of GST Council and the functions of the GST Council, and these can be important for preliminary examination. And we have taken this information from the Prelims Compass of Economic Development. With this, let's take up the next article. Now this article on page number 1 is related to one of the goals that was announced in the Union Budget of 2019, that is Indian economy aims to become a $5 trillion economy by the year 2024. However, the CEO of Niti Aayog, Amitabh Kant, has made a presentation before the government and has highlighted that the present economic slowdown may make it difficult for the government of India to achieve this target of $5 trillion economy. And in this light, he has highlighted that for India to become a $5 trillion economy by the year 2024, the nominal GDP should be at least 12.4%. However, as reflected in the current GDP data, the nominal GDP growth rate in the first quarter of this financial year was hardly 8%. And besides the data of the first quarter, there are fears that in the second quarter, the GDP growth rate may further see slowdown. Now, this slowdown has mainly been because of a slowdown in the domestic consumption, slowdown in the investment rates, and we note that India's banking sector is facing the problem of non-performing assets, and that is going to create a slowdown in the credit creation. And all these factors will collectively contribute or will collectively make it difficult for the India to become a $5 trillion economy, and this was highlighted by the CEO of the Niti Aayog. Now, all these aspects were presented by the CEO of Niti Aayog to the Government of India. However, this presentation is not available in the public domain and it was accessed by the Hindu newspaper only. And hence the further details of the presentation are not known as of now. So in this regard, let us look at two previous DNS videos in which we have covered the issue of falling domestic consumption and also why has there been a slowdown in the investment rate. And in another video, we have discussed the various aspects and challenges that are faced by the Indian economy, and that would make it difficult for the Indian economy to become a $5 trillion economy. Besides these, we have also discussed and provided various suggestions that were provided in those articles. So in this background, after going through those videos, you should try and answer this question from your mains examination point of view. So what we will do is that we will revise from both these videos various aspects that have been highlighted regarding the slowdown in domestic consumption, slowdown in investment rates, and also what are the challenges which are being faced by the Indian economy regarding its target of $5 trillion. Now let us understand the background and what is happening currently in India. So presently the Indian economy is facing an economic slowdown, and which is clearly evident from the declining GDP growth rate. Now this decline in GDP has been attributed to both the supply factors as well as the demand factors. Now these supply side factors include the lack or declining investment levels in the Indian economy, and the demand side factors include the declining consumption expenditure in India. So in this context, the economic revival would require the government to focus on both the demand side as well as the supply side, which means that the government needs to boost the consumption expenditure as well as boost the investment in the Indian economy. So this article highlights that the government is wrongly focusing only on the supply side factors without taking into account the demand side factors. And both these factors are interrelated and interdependent because the investment rates cannot pick up unless the demands for goods and services are increased, which are directly related to the consumption expenditure in India. So in this background, let us understand what is consumption expenditure in India, what are the reasons for decline in the consumption expenditure, why the government's response is not proper, and what the government should do to boost this consumption expenditure in India. So let us understand how is the consumption expenditure in India falling and what does it highlight regarding the state of Indian economy. Now you should be knowing that the consumption expenditure in India accounts for almost 60% of the India's GDP. So a decline in the consumption expenditure would have a greater impact on India's GDP as compared to the decline in investment rates. So the proportion or the weightage of consumption expenditure on India's GDP rate is more as compared to the investment rates. And currently we are witnessing a slowdown or decline in these consumption expenditures. Further, this decline in consumption expenditure is witnessed in various sectors of economy, and the main sectors which are witnessing this decline are the automobile sectors as well as FMCG products. Further, there has been decline in demand evenly for commonly used household goods like salty snacks, soaps, packaged tea, etc. Now, what does all these things highlight? So these things highlight that the household budgets of the poor and middle class is under strain. And as the budgets of these poor and the middle class is under strain, this has forced them to cut down the expenditure on such commonly bought goods. And this lack of expenditure by the poor and the middle class is leading to a decline in the consumption expenditure in India. So after this, let us understand what are the main reasons for decline in this consumption expenditure. Now the reasons for the decline in consumption expenditure which have been highlighted by the author mainly include: first is the lack of inclusive growth, second are the wrong government policies, and third important factor is the agrarian distress. So first let us understand how is the lack of inclusive growth impacting the consumption expenditure in India. So in this regard, the author explains that inclusive growth is quite critical for sustaining the higher consumption expenditure. However, in the past, the growth trajectory in India has benefited only a small section of India's society. And this has led to increased income inequalities. So this means that only a upper section of the society is benefiting from the growth story of India. And this growth has not dispersed to the poor and the middle class or the marginal sections of the society. Further, a recent survey released by NSSO has said that the unemployment levels have increased in India. And these increase in unemployment levels have reduced the income levels of the people. So the income inequality and the unemployment levels are one of the factors for decrease in the incomes of people. And as the incomes of people is decreasing, this is leading to a decline in the consumption expenditure. Secondly, the author has highlighted that the government policies like demonetization and the goods and services taxes imposition has adversely impacted the informal sector. And regarding the informal sector, you should note that it employs majority of the India's workforce. Now, as majority of Indians are employed in the informal sector, this has reduced the demand and is adversely also impacting the investment by the formal sector. Now, as the investment by the formal sector is declining, it is leading to poor job creation. And as there is poor job creation, there is low income levels of the people, and this is leading to low demand. And all this has led to a vicious economic cycle, which means that all these factors are reinforcing themselves and cumulatively they are leading to a decline in the consumption expenditure. Now, as we all know that the agriculture sector in India is presently going through a period of distress. And this has mainly been due to the structural problems in the Indian agriculture. Now, although the government has come out with various policies, but they have not reflected their results. And this is leading to poor income levels of the farmers, and this has led to a reduced demand for goods and services in the rural areas. So all these three important factors have led to a decline in the consumption expenditure, and which was mainly responsible for slowdown in Indian economy. And all these factors are the demand side factors which are leading to a slowdown in the Indian economy. Now after this, let us analyze how good is the response of the government for controlling this slowdown, which mainly focuses on the supply side factors only. Now, highlighting the response of the government in controlling this slowdown, the author has said that the response of the government has been poor. And the author further explains that the government has wrongly focused on the supply side measures in order to enhance the investment rates. Now, as we all know that recently the finance minister has unveiled a number of measures to boost the Indian economy. And those measures were discussed in the previous DNS video. However, most of these measures emphasize on increasing the investment rates, which are mainly the supply side factors. Further, the government has decided to infuse rupees 70,000 crores into public sector banks to increase the credit creation and investment rates in Indian economy. However, the author is skeptical and says that it may not lead to higher investment rates because the private sector is reluctant to invest due to lower demand, as we have discussed in this article. Also, the government has decided to exempt the foreign portfolio investments from the higher surcharge which was imposed in the budget of 2019. Even on this front, this is unlikely to have any effect because it would not boost the demand in the Indian economy. So the author mainly highlights that there is lack of demand, and this demand side has to be focused by the government rather than focusing only on the supply side factors. So after this, let us understand what are the key suggestions by the author to handle this situation and how to boost the demand in India. So finally, what steps should the government take in order to control and boost the demand side in Indian economy? So in this regard, the author has suggested that the Union Budget of 2019 has not provided any fiscal stimulus to address the problem of demand in India. Now, fiscal stimulus simply means the government should increase its investment in various sectors which are likely to boost the demand in the Indian economy. And one of the suggestions of the author in this regard is that there should be massive increase in public expenditure in the rural areas, particularly on the NREGA or the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Now, what would such an expenditure do is that such an enhanced expenditure would have local multiplier effect in the form of creation of employment opportunities. And once these employment opportunities are there, it will lead to higher income levels and will consequently boost the demand in Indian economy. So all these are interrelated. So the government should focus and increase its investment in those areas which are likely to boost the demand in Indian economy. Now, after revising the issue of slowdown in domestic consumption and investment rates, let us look at another DNS video and revise from that video various challenges that are being faced by the Indian economy in its target of $5 trillion. So this article mainly highlights the challenges with India's growth model and also provides certain sets of recommendations to promote inclusive and sustainable growth in India. Now this will fall under the General Studies paper 3 under the topic Economic Development and also in the subtopic Inclusive Growth and Issues Arising from it. Now if you look at the previous year questions in the mains examination in the General Studies paper 3, questions have been asked regarding the nature of growth which has been witnessed in India in the past 20 to 25 years. For example, this question in 2015 highlighted that the nature of economic growth in India in recent times is often described as jobless growth. Further, the question which was asked in 2017 was that what are the features of inclusive growth, and has India been experiencing such a growth process? So by these questions, you come to the conclusion that the nature of India's growth story is important for us from the mains examination. And in this context, this article becomes especially very important for us from mains examination point of view. So in this regard, first let us take up the concerns and challenges with India's growth model which have been highlighted by the author. Now the main challenges with India's growth model which have been highlighted by the author include there is lack of inclusive growth, there is poor human capital formation, further there are fears of economic slowdown, the growth has been termed as environmentally unsustainable, and also it has been termed as a jobless growth story. So let us look at these factors one by one. Now after the liberalization, privatization and globalization of Indian economy, India has witnessed huge growth. However, this growth has not reached the poorest sections of the society, and also the inequality between the richest and the poor has been increasing continuously in the past. And this has been particularly highlighted by a report of the Credit Suisse, which highlights that 1% of the wealthiest in India have increased their share in the wealth from 40% in 2010 to 60% in the last 5 years. So this report by the Credit Suisse highlights that the top 1% wealthiest people of India had 40% share in the total economy in the year 2010. However, in the past 10 years, this figure has increased to 60% in the present times, which means that the wealthiest top 1% people own 60% wealth of the Indian economy. So this highlights the nature of inequality that is prevailing between the richest and the poorest. Further, the wealth of top 10% rich people of India is way more as compared to the wealth of remaining 90% of the population. So this highlights that there is concentration of wealth in the top 10% people of India. And also, the wealth is disproportionately distributed between the top 1% and the remaining 99% population. So these figures highlight that there has been lack of inclusive growth in India in the past 20 years after the LPG reforms. Now the second challenge with the India's growth model has been the poor human capital formation in the past 20 to 25 years. Now regarding the population of India, it is said that India has got a huge demographic dividend because most of its population is in the younger age. And it is said that if India optimally utilizes its demographic dividend, it can sustain higher GDP growth rates. However, the human capital formation for this young population has been very poor, which is reflected from the literacy rates in India. Now, as we know that India's literacy stands at 71% according to the 2011 census. However, this figure stands much lower as compared to various African countries like Rwanda, Morocco, Congo, etc. And this remains a big challenge in terms of formation of human capital in India. Now, besides the literacy rates, the quality of education has also been poor in India, and which was reflected by the survey of ASER or the Annual Status of Education report. Now, this report highlights the learning outcomes in India, and it highlights that these learning outcomes in India have remained poor. Further, various international indices have been highlighting the poor status of health and nutrition in India. For example, various indices like the Global Hunger Index, the Human Development Index, the Human Capital Index, and also India's own National Family Health Survey have highlighted that there are concerns related to poor nutrition and health in India. Now, if there is lack of human capital formation, this demographic dividend will turn into a demographic disaster for India. This is because India could not optimally utilize the huge potential provided by its population in the younger age group. The third important challenge regarding India's growth model is its jobless growth scenario. Now, India has been witnessing continuously higher growth rates in the past 20 years. However, the jobs have not been commensurately increasing with this economic growth. And this has been highlighted by the recent survey, which was named as the PLFS survey or the Periodic Labour Force Survey. And this highlights that the unemployment scenario in India has increased to a 45 years high. And currently the employment rates in India stand at about 6.1%. So this highlights that there has been huge unemployment problem in India despite India witnessing huge growth rates in the past 20 years. And this has mainly been because India's manufacturing sector has been lagging, and this growth has been boosted by the service sector only. Further, India's growth has been described as environmentally unsustainable. And the economic growth in India has led to severe depletion and degradation of environmental resources. Now, you might be knowing that recently a report was released by the IPCC and it had highlighted and warned India of seriousness of the climate change and its adverse impact on the environment. Further, recently the convention of the UN Convention on Combating Desertification was held in India, and it again highlighted the problem of land degradation in India. So India has also to be aware of the environmental challenges which are being faced due to this economic growth. And lastly, one of the most important challenges to the growth model has been the recent economic slowdown, which has been highlighted by the GDP data series. So as we all know that the GDP or the gross domestic product growth rate has declined to only 5% recently. And this reduction in the GDP growth rate is reflected in the reduction and slowdown in investments, savings and exports in India. Also, we know that the automobile sector has been adversely impacted because of this slowdown. Now, although the economic slowdown is a recent phenomenon, the agriculture sector has been continuously facing the distress situation. And the agriculture sector has been adversely affected by rising input costs, low price of agricultural produce, and low public investment, and which has led to a decline in the incomes of the farmers. And due to this slowdown or distress in the agriculture sector, it is adversely impacting the economic growth story also. And this decline in the incomes of the farmers is adversely impacting the demand in the Indian economy. And that is one of the major factors for the current economic slowdown. So in this regard, let us look at some of the suggestions which have been provided by the author. Now, the first suggestion which has been provided by the author is that to realize the dream of $5 trillion economy, India should focus on its human capital formation. Now, we know that India has a huge population in the young age, and if this young population is given good health and education, it can be converted into human capital, which will further boost India's goal of achieving the $5 trillion economy. So in this regard, the suggestion of the author is that the government's investment in education should increase to about 6% of the GDP. Now, presently, the government is spending only 4% of the GDP on the educational development in India. Further, regarding the focus on the health sector, the author is suggesting that the government's spending on the health sector should increase from present 1.5% to 3% of the GDP. And if such public investments on the education and health sector are increased, this will ultimately lead to an inclusive growth story. And this is because it will create better employability for the young population of India. The second suggestion which has been provided by the author is boosting the demand, or the focus of the government should be on boosting demand. Now, we all know that the present slowdown has been the result of slowdown or decline in the consumption expenditure. So in this context, the government should focus on boosting the demand in the economy. So in this context, the government's focus should be on bringing the agriculture sector out of the present distress situation. Now, how the government can improve the situation in the agriculture sector is that they can increase the public investment in the agriculture and should also invest in infrastructure development in the agricultural sector. Also, focus should be on providing cheaper inputs to the farmers, facilitating the access to the markets for the farmers so that they can get fair and remunerative prices for their produce. Further, the consumption expenditure or the demand has been continuously declining in the rural India because of this distress in the agricultural sector. So in this background, the government should allocate more funds to the NREGA program to alleviate the agrarian distress, and this will boost the demand in the rural sector or the rural areas. And further, the focus of the government should be on creation of employment opportunity across sectors. And in this line, the government must focus on promoting labor-intensive sectors. This is because these sectors employ large number of people. And these labor-intensive sectors include the textile sector, the leather, gems and jewelry sector, etc. And the government should also raise public employment by filling up all the vacant posts in the central government and the state governments. So these are three suggestions or the four suggestions which have been provided by the author for improving and making the growth story inclusive. Now, in the background of the economic slowdown, the government has announced various measures recently. However, the author analyzes that these measures have not been able to provide good results and have not been able to arrest the economic slowdown because of mainly two reasons. The first is that these measures which are announced by the government address only these supply side measures and they do not focus on the demand side, or they do not focus on boosting the consumption expenditure. And also, these recently announced government measures do not address the need of the weaker sections. And these weaker sections, which mainly reside in the rural areas, are mainly affected by the distress in the agricultural sector. And because of this, there has been lack of consumption expenditure or demand in the rural India. So in this background, the author suggests that the government should look at these weaker sections not only for improving their well-being, but also for getting out from the present economic slowdown, because a focus of the government on the weaker sectors is likely to improve the consumption expenditure in the weaker sections or mainly in the rural India. And if that happens, that will be a boost to the economic growth of India and will make the target of $5 trillion economy by 2024 achievable and inclusive at the same time. So after revising from both these videos, you should try and attempt this question from your mains examination point of view. And with this, let's take up the next article. Now these two articles on page number 13 and page number 15 are related to the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And in this first article on page number 13, you should note that the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will be visiting India in the next month. So in this background, this article reads that the Japanese officials will try again to make India review its decision not to join the arrangement. Now, as we have recently learned that India did not join this Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So in this background, the Japanese officials will try to convince India to review its decision of not joining the RCEP. Further, in this news article on page number 15, the former Prime Minister of Australia, Tony Abbott, has said that India's reluctance to join the RCEP is understandable. And he has further said that this pact looks like an extension of China's Belt Road Initiative. Now, recently only India decided not to join the RCEP, and that is why this issue was in news in the last month. So we have covered this issue of RCEP in detail in a previous DNS video. And in that video, we have discussed the various aspects of RCEP, various concerns which have been raised by India, and also what are going to be its diplomatic implications for India. So let us once again revise from that DNS video the various aspects of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and also the various concerns raised by India. Now, originally RCEP was a proposed free trade agreement between 16 nations. And these free trade agreement was between 10 ASEAN members and its 6 free trade agreement partners. So the 10 ASEAN countries are the 10 Southeast Asian countries, and the 6 free trade agreement partners are China, Japan, India, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand. However, as the trade deal has been finalized, India has withdrawn from this RCEP deal. However, all other 5 free trade partners and the 10 ASEAN countries have joined this RCEP. Now, if India was a part of this RCEP, it would have accounted for 25% of the world GDP, that is 1/4 of the world GDP. Secondly, it would have accounted for 30% of the world trade, 26% of the foreign direct investment flow, and 45% of world's population. Further, the combined trade of the RCEP members stands at about $2.7 trillion. So these figures show that this RCEP could have played a key role in the global economy. And with increasing integration, RCEP would have stood as one of the biggest and largest economic bloc in the world. However, now as India has withdrawn from this RCEP, the RCEP would account for only 1/3 of the global GDP. And further, without India, RCEP would account for only 1/3 of the world's population as against the proposed 45% of the world's population. So this shows that India would have been one of the important partners in this RCEP deal. However, India has chosen to remain out of this RCEP because of various concerns. So after this, let us look at what would have been the impact on India's trade if India joined this RCEP deal. Now, what is the present status of India's exports and imports with the existing countries which are participating in the RCEP? So, if you look at the figures, the RCEP countries presently account for almost 27% of India's total trade. So, this reflects that RCEP countries are important for India's trade relations. And that is why India wanted to join this RCEP deal. Secondly, exports to these RCEP countries account for about 21% of India's total exports. And as far as the imports are concerned, India imports from RCEP countries and these comprise about 34% of India's total imports. So these figures reflect that these countries which are part of the RCEP are important trading partners of India. However, the biggest concern that India has is that out of the 15 countries in the RCEPs, India has trade deficit with almost 11 countries. And this total trade deficit stands at about $105 billion. Now, out of this huge trade deficit, China accounts for about $53 billion of the trade deficit alone, which means that 50% of the trade deficit of India with the RCEP countries is with China. And that is why this is one of the biggest concern of India joining the RCEP deal, because it runs trade deficit with one of the important partners of RCEP, that is China. Now, there are certain products in which India has trade surplus. However, there are many more products in which India has a trade deficit. For example, India runs trade surplus in agriculture and allied products, textiles, gems and jewelries. However, India's concern is that if India joins this RCEP deal, these trade surpluses in the fields of agriculture, textiles, gems and jewelries could be wiped off. And that is mainly because India would be forced to reduce tariffs on the imports related to these products. Further, another concern that India has is that the products in which India has trade surplus account for only a small portion in the deficit with other commodities. So there are many more commodities in which India has a trade deficit, and it only has trade surplus in few products. And that is one of the biggest concern of India as far as joining the RCEP is concerned. Now, the items in which India has huge deficits is related to electrical machinery, iron and steel, electronics, etc. So these are the figures related to the exports and imports of India with the RCEP countries. And the biggest concern is that India has huge trade deficit with China in the RCEP. Now, diplomatically and economically, what would be the impact if India does not join the RCEP? Or what would be the impact on India if it does not join the RCEP? So it is said that diplomatically, India will stand losing a great opportunity to be a part of world's biggest trade bloc. And as China has already become a member of this RCEP, it will end up completely dominating the trade in this Southeast Asian and Pacific region. Further, we note that India wants to become an export-oriented economy. However, if India remains out of this RCEP deal, it would affect India's export ambitions. And thirdly, India stands to lose out on important opportunities like global supply chain management and high-end goods. So these are few impacts that are likely to occur if India does not join this RCEP in the near future. Now, why is India not joining this RCEP, or what are the concerns of India as far as the RCEP is concerned? So India has said that India wants these issues to be resolved first, and only after these issues are resolved, India will become a member of the RCEP. So after this, let us look at what are the various issues and what is India's stand and what is the stand of other RCEP members. Now, the first concern of India is related to the base year for tariffs. And in this, India has said that the base year should be 2019. And this is because India has raised tariffs between 2014 to 2019. However, majority of the countries in the RCEP have said that the base year for the calculation of tariffs should be 2013, and that is when the talks started for this RCEP. Now, for example, if on a product P, the tariff imposed by India was about 10% in the year 2014. And in the year 2019, this tariff has been raised to about 15%. So India wants that any change in the tariff should be based on this year, that is the base year, which should be 2019. So for example, all the countries agree to reduce tariff on this product, it should be reduced on the 2019 tariff, that is 15%. So for example, if the countries decide to reduce the tariffs by 2% on this product P, it should be on the 2019 tariff, that is 15%. So it will be reduced to only 13%. However, the other countries want that this reduction in the tariff should be on the base year 2014's tariffs, which means that the reduced tariff would now be only 8%. So in this line, India has said that the base year for the tariffs calculation should be year 2019. And why is it so? This is mainly because India has raised various tariffs between 2014 to 2019. So if any fall in tariff occurs, it would not impact India adversely. However, most of the countries which are participating in the RCEP have said that the base year for the tariffs calculation should be 2013, and that is exactly when the RCEP talks started. Now, second is related to the freedom to increase tariff or decrease tariff rates. So in this, India's stand is that there should be freedom to increase the tariff rates. So for example, if on a product P, the tariff is about 10%, India says that it should be free to increase or reduce the tariff. However, the other countries which are participating in RCEP have agreed that once the tariffs are reduced on one product P, it can never go up and it should only go down. So for example, if the tariff on product P is reduced from 10 to 8, it cannot again be made 9. However, it can further be reduced to 7. Third issue is related to the rules of origin of the products. Now, India wants that the rule of origin of products should strictly be from the country of import. However, other countries have agreed that the rules of origin of any product can be anywhere within the RCEP region. Now, what the rules of origin mean is that it means the country where the product which is being imported by India originates. Now, for example, if there is a product P, and if India is importing this product from China, it should also be produced in China only. Now, what is the concern here? So, you should understand that on this product P which India imports, if India has a tariff of 10% for China, and on the other hand, if India has a tariff of about 7% for import of the same product from Indonesia, what China would do is that it would route that product from Indonesia towards India. And that is how it can avoid being charged with higher tariffs for exports to India or on Indian imports. So India strictly wants that the rules of origin should be from the country of import. So whatever product India is importing from Indonesia should be originated in Indonesia only and should not be routed by any other country through Indonesia. So this was just an example. So India has said that the rules of origin should strictly be from the country of import only. However, other countries have said that such rules of import can be anywhere from within the RCEP region. Further, regarding the tariff lines, India has said that it should be possible for India to have country-specific negotiations regarding different tariffs on different products. However, other RCEP countries have agreed that there should be more or less uniform tariffs on all the participating countries. So India says that India should have possibility of negotiating different tariffs for different countries, or there should be country-specific negotiation on tariffs on different products. Now the next issue is related to the issue of data localization, and we have covered this issue of data localization in one of the previous DNS videos. Now in this regard, India wants that all the multinational companies which are operating in India should store the data of its citizens in India only, and it should not be stored in any other country. However, other RCEP countries have said that there should be free flow of data except for national security purposes, which means that there should be free flow of data of different people of different countries for economic purposes. Now, the next issue is related to the safeguard mechanism. Now, what is this safeguard mechanism? So, here you should note that when there is exceptional surge in imports of some of products, the countries impose high duty on those products. Now, the issue here is that India wants an auto trigger mechanism in case of import surge. So, if India sees that there is increased surge in imports of some products, it should be able to impose these safeguard duties. However, the RCEP countries are saying that such safeguard duties should only be imposed in exceptional cases and there should not be any auto trigger mechanism, which means that such safeguard duties should be imposed only after negotiation with the other countries. So these are few issues between India and other RCEP countries, and these are mainly related to the base year, the ratchet clause, rules of origin, tariff lines, data localization, and safeguard mechanisms. Now, after this, let us look at, despite all the issues and concerns which have been raised by India, why is India tempted to join RCEP? Now, we note that India has trade deficits with various RCEP countries. However, India sees this as an opportunity, and that is mainly because of its service sector. And if you look at the trade balance in the service sector, India has had a surplus in the service sector in the past 3 to 4 years. However, it has had trade deficit in the merchandise products. Now we note that India's merchandise trade has been in deficit since 1977, and in the last decade, this has stood at about $1.4 trillion. So in this background, as India's service sector is its strength, India wants that if it becomes part of RCEP and by increasing the service sector exports, India can benefit and reduce this trade deficit in merchandise and other products. And further, trade and services are in surplus and they are growing at a strong rate. And that is why RCEP could provide a boost to India's service exports. Now, although India is tempted to join this RCEP, let us look at how India's previous trade deals have fared. Now, it is said that India's track record has not been very good when it comes to free trade agreements. And this is reflected in the utilization rates of free trade agreements by India. And this stands at about 25%. So what all benefits were likely to arise out of these free trade agreements previously did not arise in case of India. And India could only make use and benefit of about 25% of the clauses of the existing free trade agreements. Further, India has had a free trade agreement with the ASEAN countries. However, the merchandise trade deficit has widened to about $14.6 billion presently. Further, the import duties foregone during the last 3 years are about $10.3 billion. Now, what import duties foregone means is that if India did not come into any free trade agreement, what would have been India's earnings from these import duties? Further, India has had a free trade agreement with South American trade bloc, that is Mercosur. And with that trade bloc also, India runs a trade deficit. And finally, India also runs a trade deficit with African countries. Now, all this data shows that India has not benefited much from these free trade agreements previously. Now, after this, let us look at the China factor in India's withdrawal from the RCEP. Now, we know that India is running a trade deficit with China. And China accounts for over 50% of India's trade deficit. Now, what trade deficit means is that India is importing more from China and is exporting less to the China. And which can be seen in this graph, which shows data of imports and exports from the year 2010 till the year 2018 and 19. Now, these figures show that the rate of growth of exports has not been very good in case of India's exports to China. However, the imports from China have increased till the year 2017 and 18. And they have only witnessed a dip in the year 2018 to 19. Further, India's trade deficit with China has risen 13-fold in the past decade. And what India exports to China are mainly primary products, which means that it only includes ores, minerals, and cotton. However, India imports manufactured products from China, which means that India is importing high value products from China while it is exporting low value products to the China. And this is one of the reasons for trade deficit with China. Now, India's biggest concern is that in the background of this existing high trade deficit with China, if India joins RCEP and the tariffs on various products are lowered, then China will dump India's markets with cheap exports and cheap products. And that is likely to worsen the trade deficit that exists between India and China, which is already very high, and it stands at about 50% of India's total trade deficit with all other countries. Now, what all areas should be focused by India before joining and deciding to join this RCEP deal? So first is that India should enhance its exports. Now, as we have learned that India already runs trade deficits with 11 of the members of the RCEP. So this shows that this figure of trade deficit can only be reduced if India works on its exports. Secondly, India should also work on building the manufacturing capabilities, and that is mainly because India has lagged behind in the manufacturing sector. And that is one of the reasons why China is flooding Indian markets with manufactured products. Third is that India should also focus on making high value goods at a competitive price. And we know that the major articles of exports from India are primary products, and they are not high value manufactured or finished products. And a corollary of this is that India should also focus on innovation and research. And India should capitalize on its existing advantages in the service sector, because we know that the service sector exports have increased. And that is why India should further leverage on this capability and advantage which it is already having in the service sector. So in this article, we have understood what is RCEP and what was the economic importance of RCEP for the global economy. After this, we looked at the trade deficit of India with various RCEP countries and what would have happened to India's exports and imports if India chose to join this RCEP. Further, what are the likely economic and diplomatic impacts if India does not join this RCEP? And after that, we have looked at various concerns which have been raised by India regarding the various clauses of the RCEP deal. After that, we looked at as to why India was tempted to join the RCEP and how have the previous free trade agreements of India with various other trade blocs and countries fared in the past. After that, we looked at the China factor in India withdrawing from the RCEP. And finally, what all areas need to be focused before India joins RCEP. Now, after this discussion, you can try and answer this question from your mains examination point of view. And with this, let's take up the next article. Now, this lead article on page number 10 is related to the issue of electoral bonds that has been highlighted and has been in news recently. And this forms a part of the General Studies paper 2 under the topic Governance and Indian Polity. So this article basically highlights some of the issues with the electoral bonds and how are they a threat to the democracy in India. And various aspects of electoral bonds have been covered in 2 previous DNS videos in the month of November. Now the various issues related to the electoral bonds were discussed in the Daily News Simplified of 2nd November 2019 by Basawa sir and in the DNS of 19th November 2019 by Nagendra sir. And both these discussions have highlighted the background of the electoral bonds, how were they introduced and why were they introduced in the first place. And also they have highlighted the issues or the problems with these electoral bonds. So in the DNS of 2nd November 2019, the concept of electoral bonds has been explained in detail. So for example, what kind of denominations can be used? What is the maturity period? Will the identity of the person be known or not, etc. Further, what has been the debate which has been surrounding the electoral bonds issue has also been discussed in the DNS of 2nd November 2019. And in this, two questions have been answered as to how electoral bonds have improved the transparency and what are the issues on political fundings even after the introduction of electoral bonds. Further, in the DNS of 19th November 2019, various other aspects of the electoral bonds and concerns have been discussed in details. So it is suggested that you should go through both these videos to understand the issues surrounding the electoral bonds in detail. With this, let's take up the next article. Now again, this article on page number 10 is related to the Brexit deadlock. And this article highlights various issues regarding the Brexit. And this falls under General Studies paper 2 under the topic International Relations. Now, this issue of Brexit has been covered in detail in the Daily News Simplified of 18th October 2019 by Nagendra sir. And he has discussed various aspects of this Brexit deal, what it means, why Britain wants to move away, and various other aspects like the Good Friday Agreement, etc. So you should go through this video of DNS to understand the issue of Brexit in detail. Now after this discussion, you should go through these questions and the answer will be displayed after 5 seconds. So the first question reads, consider the following statements about the GST Council. First is that it is a statutory body, which is incorrect because it is a constitutional body. Second is that all the decisions of this council are taken by consensus, which is also incorrect because all the decisions are taken by 3/4 of the weighted votes in the council. However, only till now, all the decisions have been taken by consensus, and that is why this statement is also incorrect. Hence, the correct answer is D, neither 1 nor 2. Second question is that Ghoramara was recently in news in the context of impact of climate change on this island. It is located in which of the following? So the correct answer is C, that is Sundarbans Delta. Third question reads, which of the following species is or are found in the Sundarbans Delta? First is the northern river terrapin, second is the Irrawaddy dolphin, and third is the fishing cat. And all the three are found here. Thus D is the correct answer. With this we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.